Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us today for this workshop on commercialization. We're really excited to have a fantastic speaker to tell you all about the commercialization processes at UHN. My name is Dr. Amanda Berry, and I'm the lead of the Office of Research Trainees. I'm joined here by the coordinator, Jordan Beck. So we'll get started right away. If you have questions at any point in time for Alan, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A at the end where we'll pose all the questions and we'll get answers to all of them. Also, thank you to everyone who submitted questions ahead of time, which we will also be showing or presenting to Alan. So with that, we'll get started. So we're excited to have Alan DeBono here today. Alan holds a PhD in cell molecular biology from UBC. He worked as a synthetic biologist at a private biotech firm in Burnaby, British Columbia. There, he engineered a novel yeast to have enhanced xylose consumption. Alan contributed to 3 patents. After biotech, he went to the Sauder School of Business at UBC to pursue an MBA and started consulting for Vancouver area businesses in biotechnology and the Internet of Things AI spaces. Alan worked at the Rotman School of Management's Creative Destruction Lab, where he led the health diagnosis stream and founded the biomedical engineering stream. At UHN, Alan works with world-leading researchers at Princess Margaret, facilitating agreements and assisting with commercialization matters. Thanks so much, Alan, for being here with us.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. Just before I start, I was really blown away. Jordan had shared all of your questions, and it's really humbling to be able to present in front of a bunch of people who are so thoughtful. So my idea today is to give a presentation that will be reasonably high level, but will have a lot of space for you to ask your questions. And I hope we can have some discussion at the end, possibly getting into the specific questions. So with that, thank you for the introduction, Amanda. It's very nice. What I'd like you to take away from my presentation today is that our office is not a black box. And really, I think what happens is with such large organizations like UHN is sometimes we get siloed. And I remember being a graduate student, and I'm sure all of you have open air kind of environments where you work, where you kind of share spaces and there are no walls between your labs. One of the things that was interesting is that despite having the shared space, the only thing we tended to share between labs was air. And so what I would like to do is impart the idea that we're a part of your team. And so I've left my email in the title slide. I will be providing this presentation as a PDF. Please reach out to me if you need something. If I can't help you, or if you're not specifically in my portfolio, the LPs in my office tend to be assigned to different principal investigators. But if you're not associated with a principal investigator that is in my portfolio, I'll do my best to point you in the correct direction or get you on your way to an answer. So part of your team. So who are these people? We have a rather big office. And in fact, we don't have enough space for all of the people because many of these people were hired in the COVID era and have stayed on because they're absolutely spectacular. But I'd like to point out a couple of features. One is that in the middle of the screen, you'll see about, let's see, can I see here? Yay Hai, Erno Wienholz, Heeman Chow, myself. We are responsible for the Princess Margaret portfolio, but there are others in our office who are responsible for Tecna, Kremble, TGH. And so those would be the people who would be your points of contact if you're affiliated with labs in those institutions. You'll also see on the left, my colleague Robert, Barty, Laura, Robert F., and June. These people are principals and they are dealing with digital AI matters. So if you have a commercialization issue associated with data and AI, it tends to be in Robert's domain. Barty is one of the people whose portfolio we'll be talking about a little bit more, and she's responsible for new venture creation. Laura deals with biomaterials and non-exclusive licensing, and Robert Folds has just come onto our team, and he handles something called the IAF, or Innovation Acceleration Fund. June handles business intelligence. And the others, of course, is our director, Mark Taylor. Allison leads strategic initiatives. Anya is our strategic communications guru. And on the right side, there are all of the operations people, and they help keep our machinery running. And there are a lot of moving pieces. As we go through this, you'll start to get an appreciation of all of the interactions that we have, both with our legal counsel all the way on this side of the screen, and external legal counsel and external patent offices and so forth. So what I'd like you to know about this, you don't need to know where I was in the slide, but what's the most important part is we have really high caliber people available to help you. We have people with PhDs and MBAs. We have people who were former engineers who were entrepreneurs, former entrepreneurs themselves, people who have worked many years in technology transfer and commercialization. And so you're in very good hands. But what's also something that you may not know at this level, and I don't know where you are in your PhDs and your postdocs, so I don't know how much interaction you've had, but we have a dedicated legal counsel just taking care of matters for our office. And this tends to be very rare because in smaller institutions, legal counsel tends to be farmed out. Okay, so I tell you about the team, I tell you about the people. Why is this important? Well, one of the things that makes this important is that all of those people are dedicating to achieving some of the strategy pillars that we have. And really, those are helping take technology out of the lab, help put it in a space where it can be commercialized, where it can be incubated, nurtured, and then develop into something that's going to have a sizable patient impact. And so this, for me, makes me very excited. Amanda spoke about my creative destruction lab past, and I really like the fact that I got to see cutting edge technology coming through the creative destruction lab. And really, exactly like the creative destruction lab, I see that all the time. I see ideas that you would think are science fiction, but they are actually in practice. Some of them are going into clinical trials, and it always wows me. And so what you should take away is that this team of people is very dedicated to this mission of taking your commercializable technologies and helping translate them to make patient impact. There's also this value creation business of securing fair value. And I think this is something that's very key. And when I was a more strident graduate student starting off, I wanted to make everything open. But one of the things I'm starting to appreciate as I get more gray hair is that there's something to be said about securing a fair value for technologies. What they do is they help keep offices like ours working and staffed with the best people, but they also help pay for all of the things that help go into the commercialization event of, let's say, commercializing a portfolio of IP and spinning that out into a new company. That is an extremely expensive process and can gobble up a lot of investment dollars. And so this is one of the things that makes us unique. And of course, all of these people, these high caliber people with a very strong mission in their minds, are all gunning at making Canada a better place for research commercialization. So we like to think of ourselves as a little bit different. Why? Why might that be? Well, we have properties that make us different from other offices. We tend to be like an idea scout. People will, and we'll talk about these documents, file documents called IPDs with us, and we'll evaluate them and see what the commercialization potential is for a given IPD or invention, intellectual property disclosure. We're also like an incubator in that we have an in-house fund where every quarter there's a competition where PIs can apply for $250,000 for promising technology that can go into a potential new venture or into a licensing event. And of course, we have our in-house accelerator where we have all of these people pulling in the same direction. If you're interested in seeing a video where Dr. Wouters and Mark Taylor go into the acceleration and the incubator and the scouting, please do follow that QR code. However, you're scientists, I'm a scientist, and we like numbers. So what do the numbers say? So far I've told you we've got the team and we are doing things a little bit differently. Who cares if it doesn't work? But I'd like to say, and I think I can argue strongly that with these numbers, we've created $1.3 billion of total financing since 2014. Our exit valuations are about $5 billion. We've gone through creating about 20 startups in our pipeline. And we have exits that have gone on to NASDAQ, i.e. Avro Bio. So what I think this might convey to you is that we're doing things a little bit differently. However, it's worth doing them with us because we have marked successes. And I understand that one of the questions that came through email via Jordan was something to do with success stories. And if that person's on the call, I'm happy to go through. In the appendix for this presentation, I've listed a number of those success stories. So one of the things I really want to also impart on you is come to us, partner with us, do consider us a part of your team. Why? Because there are opportunities for you. Your technology might be licensable, and in as much we can file certain documents, we can help guide your patent strategy. We can link you at our cost with some of the best law firms in the country to help you with patents. We can also help negotiate terms for your CDAs, sponsored research agreements, and so forth. We've done this many times over. We have the N values, and what that does is it creates a significant amount of power when you come to us, because now you have the benefit of the experience of the entire office and then the historical experience of the office. So this is a very powerful item that I don't want to undersell. That level of experience and that level of resource is extremely valuable as you're going into dealing with a Pfizer or a GSK or a Roche when you're having a service agreement or a sponsored research agreement. Of course, there are the more nuts and bolts things like startup formation. We also help with material transfers, and we had Miriam Tchaikovsky help us with material transfers. She's on leave. However, in her place, Wajiha is taking over the material transfer agreements. And that's probably where you'll interact with our office first if you're new to our organization. And then, of course, there are strategic alliances. So here it says long-term risk sharing for collaborations. Really what this means is setting up a relationship that's extremely positive between your lab group with your research and an external party, and making sure that it can develop as much as possible outside of the confines of, let's say, limited grants. So that might be funding from an external partner that is interested in your technology. And indeed, we have programs that we're affiliated with, like the Sanofi Eye Award, where there's $150,000 US for helping develop technologies at UHN and other premier research institutions. Okay, protecting intellectual property. This is, I think, a very busy slide, but I've tried to distill it into three major buckets. So the IP policy. So we have what's called a institution owns, or UHN owns all IP. And that is, as staff, as trainees, UHN owns the IP. And this applies to all the staff, physicians, researchers, nurses, students, etc. It would even apply to me if I were to develop some, let's say, Python script that can pull out specific words every time a specific patent is published and send them out to our office. However, with revenue sharing is a little bit different. When revenue comes in as a result of a commercialization event, as a result of licensing, that tends to be a 50-50 event. But with institutional works are, of course, under that UHN owns policy, and that is 100% with the institution UHN. This doesn't apply to your papers. This doesn't apply to your theses. This doesn't apply to posters and abstracts and so forth. So the academic works are 100% the work of the researcher, the active edition, and so forth. In the middle portion of this slide, there's the two major buckets, and there's patents, copyrights, trade secrets, trademarks, and know-how. Really what happens, and I've been with the team for about 15 months, but I can tell you that by and large, people are interested in patents. Our researchers come to us, they say, is this a patentable technology? Let's discuss. So what you'll be seeing throughout the course of your research at UHN is that you'll likely develop technologies that may become the subject matter for patents. In addition, there's also copyright. Now, copyright is something else that's happening, and I tend to think of it in this Walt Disney idea. I tend to think of it like, okay, 70 years since the death of the creator, when will Mickey Mouse go into the open public domain? However, it's not just cartoons, it's not just literary works, it's also software. And as software starts eating the world, that becomes a bigger and bigger component of many theses and many postdoctoral projects. And so on the right side, on the final bucket for this slide, is just a number of things that you might consider that are patentable. What are they? Drugs, software, biological specimens, research tools, and so forth. So really what I'd like to impress upon you here is that there are, in addition to patents and copyrights, trade secrets, trademarks, and know-how. However, the realm of most of your interactions with our office will be dealing with patents. And in some cases, depending on, let's say, if you're a genomics bioinformatics lab, it might be copyright associated with software. Okay, so I'm a PhD MBA. I am definitely not a lawyer, but I can tell you with certainty, patent is a form of a legal document. And what it is really is the government of a given country, let's say the United States, the US Patent Office, will issue you a document that gives you a monopoly over the technology that you've developed. That monopoly lasts for a set period of time. In the US, it's about 20 years. And what that 20-year period gives you is you have legal recourse for anyone who's trying to steal what you're doing. The exchange for that, in addition to going through the grueling and expensive process of patenting, is you have to give the government, in the form of a patent, your secret sauce, how things work, what you did, the results that substantiate the claims that you're making for a given technology. Now, contrast this to copyrights. Copyrights are a little bit weaker. They're not as strong a document. However, they provide the original creator the exclusive right to share and reproduce the works. And I mentioned in the previous slide software, and this is becoming extremely critical for software. And a lot of the law, especially when it comes to software pertaining to AI, is being written as we speak. So taking it away, those two big buckets of patents and copyrights are what you'll be focusing on most in your career at UHN. And with that, they have distinctions and they have applications to different realms, software and other composition of matter issues, let's say development of chemical or development of device and so forth. Okay, this is more of the warning what is happening with respect to what you have to do as a researcher. Indeed, when I was a PhD student, I didn't know this, and it only became relevant to me when I became a postdoc and then an industry scientist. One of the things that's absolutely critical is to know when you can disclose. So the scientific mindset says, I'm a great scientist, I publish well, and I'm going to go to a conference and I'm going to have a presentation and I will disclose the great work that I'm doing. And that's absolutely perfect when you don't want to commercialize. The difficulty becomes once you divulge that information, you have divulged it to the public, and it precludes you from going after patents in certain jurisdictions. In Canada, in the US, and some other jurisdictions, you can disclose, and then you have about a year to file. But in other jurisdictions, you're unable to file as a result of that disclosure because you've created what's called prior art for yourself. The technology you've developed has all of a sudden been released into the public. And then the patent examiner would use that and say, this is already in the public domain. There's nothing to patent here, even though you were the creator. So it's very important to understand what your strategy is for patenting, to interact with us to help figure that out. And when persons like myself, licensing professionals, or business development officers can't help, we enlist legal, and we also have in-house patent counsel to help with this. So the timing of your book chapters, theses, posters, papers, so forth, all of those things are very important. And they are critical when you have something that you believe is going to be, let's say, a life-saving technology or a diagnostic that can save a lot of harm or defer a lot of testing that might be otherwise very uncomfortable or painful for patients. How does one do this? So I've asked you now to consider the timing. How is it then that you would come to the office and discuss this? Well, one of the first things would be just to, I don't know, call up my number, or you're all on Teams because of the UHN MS system that we use. So you would send a message, we'd set up some time to talk. But really, what we do is we file an IPD, an intellectual property disclosure. And what this this is your stake in the ground that says, this is what I've done, and this is when I did it. This is who I did it with. This is what it involves. And this is how it gets done. And so it's not just as simple as that. It's actually it is a simple form. And if you go to the links, the link on the left will take you into the Wellspring system, where you may have already gone after a material transfer agreement. Or there is a direct link to the actual docx file through the link on the right side of the screen. And so what's important then is to know that you file this document to stake a claim to what you've done. The licensing professionals in our office will review it. We'll work with our internal patent counsel, and then we will get back to you. We'll say, this is really exciting. This is something we can work with, and we would like to pursue a patent. And in other cases, there might be something else that you can do, or there might be something that you can reposition with. If it's, let's say, an AI matter, it might be looking at ways to interact with partners that are not looking at images, but looking at bulk genomic data. And so we'll help you with these decisions. And it's indeed what we like most, because it's the most creative part of our jobs. So to take away from this slide, there is a process by which you're going to stake your claim to your research, and that research is marked by the intellectual property disclosure, or in our office jargon, IPD. Okay, so rounding it out, you now have submitted your IPD. You have some technology that we're considering for patenting. Now we start thinking about what's on the horizon. What's happening in 12 months, in 2 years? What's happening when you're finished with your postdoc? Are you applying for academic jobs? Are you founding your own spin-out company? Well, if you're founding your spin-out company, that's one path. But the other path might be licensing. I work with a particular researcher who has an absolutely massive IP portfolio dating back to 2007, and there are dozens of patents. And what ended up happening for that researcher is that IP was packaged, licensed, and spun out into a company. In the case of other intellectual property developed by principal investigators at UHN, it might be a single patent. That's extremely useful. That can make a diagnostic. And then that's something that we can then license. We might license to a Pfizer. We might license to GSK. And so there are two different paths. One of the most touted paths, I think, is this new venture model. And it's something of a great amount of pride for our office, and mostly because of some of the successes I'm sure you've heard of. In addition, I mentioned AvroBio, but of course, Adela is one of the marquee companies that have come out of our office, and that's with Doctors DeCarvalho and Brotman. So really here, if you take away anything, it goes back to the things I was telling you about, and that is, we help you de-risk your technology. So your technology is one of the T's, and we call this the 3 T's foundation or framework. There's de-risking your technology, that is interacting with us to take advantage of all of the power and all of the experience that comes with our massive team of very diverse, skilled PhDs, MBAs, and lawyers. There's also creating the success for your putative venture. What does that look like? Well, it's creating that team. One of the things that we do that is extremely, I would say, novel in Canada is that we recruit what we call EIRs, entrepreneurs in residence. These are absolute dynamite people in their field, and they have held high-ranking presidential or C-suite level positions in companies, and they come in and they help with the formation of the company and the launch of the company, the way to position the company, the way to speak with investors. And UHN is there alongside as one of your long-term committed partners to help this. And this is one of those resources that we bring that is, I think, under touted, but is extremely valuable once you get into the position of requiring one of those people who've come from industry with 25 years of experience in your specific field. And then, of course, there's the tier, the terms, and that is really making sure that your IP is protected, that we create a strategy that leads to excellent financing. Because one of the things that does happen with young companies is that they may go into, let's say, an outside incubator system, and they get undervalued for the amount of work that's gone into their technology, and not just undervalued, but I think it helps set a precedent for a lower valuation for that company overall as it develops. And of course, we maintain this alignment between our scientific founders and our management teams and UHN, and then external experts who help guide where a company might go and what needs might come up as that company matures and becomes a medium-sized enterprise, or potentially a large-scale enterprise that gets traded on a public stock exchange. Okay, so one of the things that I think is really cool is our new website. It looks a lot better than the old one. Please do check it out. A lot of this information is there for you as a resource, but there are also specific policies in our UHN intranet, and it's escaping me. The one that's extremely important is the IP policy, but we can get into that once I change the view for the slides. So thank you very much, everyone. I'd really like to open it up to questions, and hopefully I can get to all of the questions that came in by way of Jordan. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alan, for that presentation. So everyone feel free, if you have any questions, to put them in the chat, and we will pose them to Alan. I'll start with a question first to say, there's a lot of different groups in Toronto that help support entrepreneurs and people starting companies. Can you kind of explain why people would come to the UHN commercialization office versus going to other places for different kinds of support?
Okay, that's a really good question for my experience. So as I mentioned, I came from Creative Destruction Lab at the University of Toronto. Creative Destruction Lab likes to develop new technology right out of the lab, usually with PhD level founders or postdocs. And so one of the things that, and I really loved working at Creative Destruction Lab. It was some of the best people I've ever worked with. But one of the things that comes with the mentorship that many accelerators like Creative Destruction Lab provide is that there's an exchange for your equity. So a lot of your equity will get gobbled up very quickly in the form of handing over your intellectual property. And that can be problematic because it creates lower value for the overall, let's say if your plan is to exit a venture. Also, we do it as well, and arguably even better. Why can I say that? When I told you about EIRs, we tend to get the very best people who are nearly perfectly aligned with a given technology. So in one example, I work with a researcher who works with nanomedicines. Our office was able to recruit a person who worked in a very similar space, who has an abundance of an experience that I think, at least as far as I saw at CDL, rivals any of the abilities of the mentors to provide guidance for a developing venture and brand new founders. So I think that's how I would look at it. I would say the amount of resources that are provided to you free of charge just because you have a uhnresearch.ca email or uhn.ca email makes our office your best first stop when you're considering commercialization.
Thank you. I see we also have Anya Jones here from the UHN commercialization office as well. So
hi, Anya.
Great to have that extra
Hi,
knowledge.
everybody. Hi.
Amazing. So we're going to go through some of the questions again. If any of the attendees have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, but we'll go through some of the pre-submitted questions. So first up, can a UHN staff work directly with the commercialization office to commercialize his individual innovation derived from past research work, like their PhD project?
Okay, good question. I think it depends on where was the PhD project. Was it in a different lab at one of the UHN sites, or is it at University of British Columbia or University of Calgary? I think that is very important. So if the project developed at UHN, absolutely, we can talk. If that project was developed at another institution, it is incumbent on you to connect with that institution, their equivalent of our commercialization at UHN, and discuss the PhD project. But I think that's the fulcrum there. It's if developed at UHN, then us. If not developed at UHN, then at the institution where the technology was developed.
Great, thank you. I think a related question will be that I'm sure many of the graduate students who work at UHN, I mean, all of them are also affiliated with the university. So how do they know how to navigate that process of whether they should go to UHN or whether they should go to U of T?
Right. That is a really good question. So one of the things I like to think about is the appointment of the PIs. And I know our PIs tend to be also University of Toronto appointed. One of the things you could do is ask your PI, what's your primary appointment? Is it UHN or is it University of Toronto? And if your PI's primary appointment is indeed UHN, then you should come and talk with us. If not, it might be important to discuss with U of T, or even get the relevant people at U of T on board for a conversation with an equivalent to me in my office or myself, and then we can hash that out and see where things might go.
Great, thank you. We have another question about whether there are tools available to researchers to do market research on early stage commercialization products.
Yes, and this dovetails into the last question. So if you also have a U Toronto email, you should have access to the One Library or Library One, and you would have access to things like CB Insights, ISI, and so forth. And so you would have a lot of resources just through the library. I think the library access by and through UHN tends to be dedicated to scientific journals. And so you wouldn't have those business insights. It makes sense. University of Toronto has the Rotman School of Management, so you would expect a business school to have access to those databases. But if you have a University of Toronto email address, you would be able to go to Rotman and even access one of the Bloomberg terminals. So I think it really depends on whether or not you have some affiliation with University of Toronto.
Great, thank you. For any graduate students in the room that are also affiliated with U of T has lots of courses that you can take on entrepreneurship. They have, both real courses as well as courses you can take online. So there's lots of resources there as well. We have additional question in the chat. What if a person leaves UHN? Do they lose any rights as an inventor?
What if they leave UHN? Okay, so I'm trying to think of an apt anecdote. No, they don't, because if they're on that invention disclosure form, when they, let's say, some chapter in their thesis wasn't going to be published, it became the subject matter of a patent, and they were the lead person on that patent, then I would say no, because they are documented. And that's how we would know. If you left and in 10 years, you'd say, that was chapter 6 of my thesis, and that the subject matter of that patent is mine, we would know because you would be on that IPD. So I think it's absolutely critical to, if you have designs for making sure you have your patents in order, to file those IPDs. That way we can link you to them. And indeed, in the venture creation process that I've just been through for one of my PIs, we were looking up people who were from many graduate students and postdocs generations ago, and we were telling them about the revenue distribution and how their contributions to patents were going to be giving them revenues in the company. And so absolutely, if you're on that IPD, we will track you down. We will make sure that you're a part of that process. But it's critical that you're on that IPD as well as the patent going forward.
Great. A related question to that is what should a person do if they think they should have been included on an IPD or a patent and they weren't?
Oof. Okay. I guess that would be. hmm, I guess that's a very interesting question and rather loaded. But I think the very first thing to do would be if you have, and I know sometimes relationships with advisors tend to be like marriages where many end up in divorce. I think it would be useful to have that conversation with your PI, talking about that and making sure as that IPD, that foundational document is made, that you're on it and trying to open up a conversation as to why it happened. I'm sure there are other offices that can help mediate those disputes, but I think this is one that would require like a bespoke advice. So if that is the situation you find yourself in, definitely connect with me, connect with one of my colleagues that I showed you in our team slide, and we'd be able to get you a better answer by workshopping it with our larger team and pushing you towards some solution if
Wonderful.
available.
Wonderful. I think another resource that is always available is to go to the Research Quality Integration team at UHN, who are kind of a separate group that deals with all kinds of matters related to authorship and ethics and any kind of dispute. So they're another tool in your toolkit if you feel like you need somebody to talk these things out with. Additional questions about what can a finance professional as a team member proactively do to help or support the commercialization process at UHN? So let's say they weren't directly on the patent, but they're working in a space where commercialization is happening.
Oh, that's really interesting. So we do in our team slide, we do have finance people. Wakar is one of the people who heads up finance, and he works with Cheryl, who helps with invoicing. Um, I guess it depends on the interest. So is this person working in a lab affiliated with the commercialization process? Because one of the things I might see is I don't know the very complicated inner workings of finance. So I think one of the things that can help is knowing the levers associated with setting up fixed cost centers and assigning a fixed cost center to a project and having account numbers ready. And that becomes extremely critical when we're dealing with large sponsored research agreements where large sums of money are being transferred, usually US dollars. So if that would be something this person would be interested in contributing to, that would be very useful. But I guess it would depend on the needs and the team available at the time.
For sure. Another question is, are there any barriers to commercialization for somebody who is not necessarily from Canada? Or is it as long as you're working at UHN on a project, commercialization would happen the same regardless of people's background?
Oh, it does not matter if the person is not from Canada. It only matters that you're a UHN person. That's it.
Amazing. So, any tips for somebody who is doing research now as a graduate student or a postdoc and doesn't know if the work that they're doing could lead to a commercializational product in the future? Are there any tips for how they should document their work or anything like that?
Oh, okay. So with respect to documentation, over document everything and get in the habit. I don't know how popular certain electronic lab notebooks are, but make sure you have everything time stamped that you do, because that can be extremely useful. And from some of the professional development workshops and legal seminars that we're offered to attend, I know that there have been cases where that becomes extremely critical. Like the person developing it on August 17th at 4:11 p.m. is more owner than the person developing it at 4:30. And so it's extremely important to have those verifiable, unchangeable timestamps. As far as whether or not the research is something that can be commercializable, I think it comes down to a conversation. And this is one of the things I hope you take away as audience members from this conversation is that make a conversation with me or one of my colleagues because we absolutely love talking about science. We absolutely love talking about new technologies. And so we have a really good vantage point in that we have many end values of people's technologies that we're dealing with. And so we have a pretty broad perspective, and it can be extremely useful to you. So I would say make sure your documentation is good. If you have an electronic lab notebook, that would be even better. And make sure to come to us and just discuss it. I don't like to brag mostly, but I will brag that I make some of the best coffee. So if you do come to the office Mondays, Wednesdays, and some Fridays, I will make you the best cup of coffee and we will talk about technology.
Thank you. And just a reminder, just something Alan said previously, is to also make sure that you're being careful of where you disclose your information. So not presenting anywhere without talking about it with your supervisor, and being really cautious about what you're disclosing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, and if I can add, Amanda, I think there's also a really useful thing to add to that, is that you're thinking about everything. You're thinking about whatever, the Western that failed. You're thinking about the Illumina lanes that you've wasted because the prep was bad. But don't skimp on the amount of time that you have to communicate with us that a conference is coming up. Sometimes we get into these situations where there's 2 weeks to a conference, and the thing that the researcher is working on is highly patentable, but it causes a lot of difficulty to actually get that patent started. Meeting with our external legal team, meeting internally to set up some of those meetings. And so I would say, try to be mindful. I know you have a million things going, you have a million experiments going at the same time, but definitely try to take some appreciation of the fact that it does take a little bit of time, and there's a runway involved with, let's say, getting your patent started before you go to ASCO.
Absolutely. It's a good warning, or a reminder for everyone that everything takes time. So, it's always good to plan ahead for anything that you're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'll have one final question. How and when did you discover that you were interested in this as a career path? We always like to put a career spin on everything we do because trainees care about that. So, yeah, how did you know about wanting to be in this career?
Oh, yeah, that's that's a good question. I think I nailed it down to about June 2018. I was setting up a Gibson assembly right before we met with our CSO and president. And I realized that I had this really critical knowledge of the science. I was at the time I was developing a yeast that had extra or modified transporters that gobbled up more xylose from the media, and that's a big deal in British Columbia because there's massive amounts of tree stands that have been damaged by the mountain pine beetle, and so there they are, dead, waste, fire kindling, and so they could be harnessed and turned into something else. And I realized that I had all of this knowledge about the guts, if you will, about making a transporter, putting that transporter in a membrane, but I had no idea whether or not we were on the right trajectory. And I started asking questions, I started reading, and then I got on a path where I eventually applied to the UBC Sauder School of Business and did my MBA there. And I think the thing that got me there was the thing that kept me in science for so long. I just started asking questions that were different. So instead of asking questions about how do I build a construct or how do I set up an RNA-seq experiment that's going to show me these things, I started asking, what's the total addressable market for deubiquitinated transporters, and what might that mean if the technology is acquired by a company? And I stopped having answers, and so I went to where I could find answers. So I went to business school, and that really opened up my horizon. And I started doing consulting because businesses need lots of consultants, and consultants are very expensive. And so as a student, I was able to do that. I was able to do that because I was a little good at it. I was able to do that for pay. And it put me on a trajectory where I started working with startups. And that's how I got here, because of that experience with startups, because of the background in hard science.
Amazing. I think that's a great reminder too for anybody out there who's still considering different career paths, that if you're interested in more than one thing, it's possible to merge many different of your interests into a career together. So if you're interested in science and you love science, but you also are interested in that business side, there are careers like Alan's out there where you can combine both.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things I did as a scientist, and you may do the same thing, or you may be superlative human beings who have no flaws. But one of the things I didn't take into account is how valuable it is to be able to have the fluidity of mind to just ask questions. Why does this happen, and will this happen if that? And I think that's useful to be a good scientist, but it's useful right across the board. And it's the difference between, we've worked with people who are those people who are constantly thinking about the next thing, and they're so good, they just think about the next potential problem and they solve it, and the people who don't think about that next problem. And I find that scientists tend to be very good at that anticipatory framework thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. We can pause there. Jordan has put the evaluation survey in the chat, so if you can take a couple moments to give us some feedback. I want to thank both Alan and Anya for joining us today. Any last thoughts or last reminders you want to share with the group, Alan?
Um, Come visit us. We're a group of really nice human beings. Just come see us. If you have any questions, absolutely drop in. If we don't have the time, we will definitely make the time to talk to you, because I know the team at large, and they're extremely excited to help you get that commercial value out of your technologies.
Anya?
And if you want to learn more about us, we have a YouTube channel, Twitter, well, now it's X, formerly Twitter channel, LinkedIn channel, and a great new website. So definitely check those out as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much to both of you for your time and for sharing all the resources. Thank you to everybody who has joined us today, and we hope to do this again soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.